Yesterday we were talking about whether we could wait for nightfall, whether we could hang around at the edge of the Shabbat boundary, waiting for nightfall in order to recruit laborers or bring in produce or maybe to watch our fields. And of course, and then we had a discussion about, whether these were activities which were permitted on Shabbat or not. And we're going to pick up this idea as we get into the fourth Mishnah in the 23rd chapter. But now we're going to get into questions of mitzvah. Machshichin atchum lefakeach al iskei kala ve'al iskei hamet. We can await nightfall at the Shabbat boundary, so we can go out right to the edge of the Shabbat boundary, hanging around there, in order to cross over it straight away when Shabbat goes out. So we can save time, if you like. This is 2,000 amot. That's about 1,000 meters. It's a kilometer. It must be, we're saving ourselves 15 minutes walk on a good road, more on a poor road. We're going to hang around at the Shabbat boundary in order to attend to the affairs of a bride or a dead person. Aliskei hamet lahavilo aron ve'tachrichin, to attend to the affairs of a dead person, to bring him a coffin and shrouds. And it's very interesting. At the end of the tractate of Berachot, the Mishnah asks, perhaps just as we say a bracha over good things, we need to say a bracha over bad things as well. And it teaches there the bracha of Hadayan Ha'emet. It's as if, as we get to the close of a tractate, we start to think about closing things. And as we're just at the end of this tractate of Shabbat, it seems that we're also thinking about these closing things. And the Mishnah continues, Goy shehevi chalalim Shabbat. If a non-Jew brings chalalim are basically reed pipes, like the pan pipes. If he brings, and people used to use those, when they were mourning. Sephardi women now wail, right? I mean, wailing is common in a Sephardi, at a Sephardi levaya, and they used to use pipes. Someone brings pipes on Shabbat. Lo yispol b'hen Yisrael. A Jew shouldn't use them. A Jew shouldn't. The translation, I'm sorry, I didn't check, because the translation says here, one must not bewail an Israelite with them. But I think, lo yispol b'hen Yisrael, okay, it might mean we shouldn't use them to eulogize a Jew, but I think it might also mean a Jew should not use them to eulogize. Eile im kein ba'u mimakom karov, unless they come from a near place. In other words, where they come from a place where they could have come from inside the Tchum. And the Rambam explains in his commentary on this Mishnah that perhaps, we might wait after Shabbat for the length of time that it might have taken for someone to bring them after Shabbat. But the Mishnah doesn't give this exception. It just says, look, we don't use them. And similarly, at the end of the Mishnah, Asulu Aron v'chafrulo kever, if he made for himself a coffin, or he dug a grave. This is a non-Jew who's doing this for himself. Yikaver bo Yisrael. A Jew can be buried in it, just as we learned that if a non-Jew lights a light, a Jew can benefit from it. If he does it for himself, but ve'im bishvil Yisrael, if he did it for a Jew, just as if he lit a light for a Jew, if he did it for a Jew, Lo yikaver bo olamit. The Mishnah is incredibly definitive. A Jew should never be buried in it. And again, the Rambam suggests that maybe, and if enough time passes after Shabbat, for it to be dug after Shabbat by a Jew, maybe this is possible, but the Mishnah is absolutely definitive. And then it goes on. It goes on. Osin kol surchei hamet. We actually perform all the needs of the dead. This is on Shabbat now. This is on Shabbat. Sechin umrichin oto ubilvad shelo yazizu vo ever. We can anoint him with oil, we wash him, providing that no limb of his is moved. The Bartanura explains this, and I actually brought the Bartanura at the end of the source sheet because he brings a really interesting principle of muktzah, which is just worth repeating. And he begins by repeating the Mishnah, provided that no limb of his is moved. And he explains, we say enough. So we shouldn't move or raise his hand or his foot or his eyelashes, for it's prohibited to carry a dead person, to move a dead person or one of his limbs, even though it is permitted to touch it. We touch, but we don't move. And then he explains, similarly, all things which are muktzah are permitted for touching, but forbidden for moving. It's an incredibly important distinction. We can touch our $100 bill all we like on Shabbat. We just can't move it. And then he explains the famous case of the egg that was laid on Shabbat, Shabbat, or the Yom Tov, and an egg that was laid on Shabbat or on Yom Tov. Asura afilu bin gia. We don't even touch it. Shemi pnei kadurita, because of its roundness. Touching it is like moving it. So it's as though he's saying, look, in principle, you could touch the egg on Shabbat if it weren't round, if it weren't such that touching it would mean inevitably moving it. And the principle he's bringing is that we can touch something muktzah on Shabbat even though we can't move it. And the dead person is muktzah on Shabbat. So we're going to follow the same principles. Shomtin et akar mitachtav. We're going to take the pillow from under him, his head. Umatilin oto al hachol bishvil she yamtin. So remember, we're in a hot climate in the time of the Mishnah, and we want to cool the body down. And the idea underneath the Mishnah is that if we take off some of the bedclothes which are keeping him away from the earth, then we'll allow the body to cool down. It'll keep for longer. I mean, it was a problem, right? In those days, keeping a body cool. So we don't move the body, but we just take away the bedclothes from under the body so that he can lie on the sand. Koshrin has lechi, we can tie up his chin, his jaw. Lo sheyale, not that we actually move it up and close it, because we're not going to move the body on Shabbat. Ele shelo yosif, just so it doesn't go further. V'chen korash and ishbara. Interesting that the broken, and similarly, if a beam is broken, interesting, the broken body and the broken beam, these are all, I mean, there's a sort of poetry in the Mishnah. It's bringing together all of these images of end of life. Somchen otor b'safsal, we're going to support it with a stool. Uvarachot hamita, with the bedboards. Not that it should rise up, exactly the same language. But it should go no further. So we put something in place that the jaw of the dead person shouldn't open up any further, or that the beam of the house shouldn't break any more, but we can't fix it on Shabbat. And the Mishnah closes, Ein ma'amtsin et hamet b'Shabbat. We don't close the eyes of a dead person on Shabbat. Interestingly, this word ma'amtsin is actually spelt with an aleph rather than ayin in the Kaufman manuscript, and the Jastro actually brings it with an aleph, but it also brings a near parallel word, not from the root amatz, but from the root atzam, but spelt this time with an ayin. So there's clearly a different way of spelling this word, but it means ma'amtsin, but it means to close the eyes of a dead person. We don't close the eyes of a dead person on Shabbat. And by the way, we don't even do that on a weekday. When someone is close to the point of death, because the Mishnah will explain. Vehamametz im yitziat nefesh, someone who closes the eyes at the point of death, harezeh shofech damim, is guilty of bloodshed, of manslaughter, we'd say in English law. The someone who's right on the edge of death, we can't do anything. We can't do anything that might hasten his death or that might push him over the edge. And the Mishnah is anxious that if we touch him, if we close his eyes, if we do anything to him, we might just push him over the edge. And even if someone is right at the end of his life, we still treat his life as precious and holy. And someone who does something to disturb it is kushofech damim, is guilty of bloodshed, just as if he'd been, someone in the prime of his years.